going on, my friends? I'm Rick, and this is your seat at the table. I'm still having a little bit of technical difficulties, but we will get through this day if it kills me. All right. So let's take a look at this. This is first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Just as a caveat, let's make sure we're on the same page. This is first edition book. 110% first edition book. The original rule book for first edition was published in 1978. The cover was different. I had that book, and then my mother flipped out during the Satanic Panic and burned it. So, in 1982, they reissued, or they continued issuing new sets of the same rules. So the rules within these pages are identical to the very first AD&D first edition book. The only difference is they changed the artwork. So this is first edition. The book is self-published, I believe, in 1982, and right about the time the Satanic Panic had hit. And so I had already had this book, and I had been playing with it for a number of years, and it had been very hard for me to get, because you have to take into account that I got my book in late 78, early 79 when it came out. I would have been 11 years old, 12 years old. So to get the book, I had to order it through a catalog and have it delivered to the house. And I had mowed lawns to pay for it. I was mowing a dozen lawns on an average every couple of weeks. I had about a dozen different quote customers, and I would mow several times a month for each one. And that's where a lot of my money buying junk food, which contributed to me being fat, and game related stuff. This was my thing. And of course my buddies had the Nintendos and the Ataris, and that's what their thing was, and that's just the way it was. So I paid $15 for this book. I still got some water damage and things like this, and so there's a lot of noise going on right now about what Wizards of the Coast is trying to do with their open gaming license. And they're trying to really screw a whole slew of people over, and they're doing a very bad job of it. And their argument that it was leaked out, that it was just a rough draft version was put to the lie that it is. And look, boys, if you can't lie well, don't lie at all. Something our politicians today are stumbling on themselves. They've lied so much that they stopped seeing the lies from the truth, and then the lies become lies, and then they lie about lying about the lies. So there's never no truth. The only truth is everybody's freaking lying. So in that aspect, WotC has done a horrible disservice to its fan base, and they're paying for it right now. There are people by the droves that are canceling their D&D Beyond subscriptions, and they're talking, truth is, it's all about the money game. And I get it. These companies are in it to make money. In order to have good new material and consistently produced material, a company needs to make money. My shelves, like many of yours shelves, are full of game supplements and stuff from companies that have bellied up. My current run on Battletech right now, we love Battletech. Let's be honest, Battletech is in its fourth corporation. The original production company's long gone. Then it was bought up by WizKids and then co-shared or subsetted to FanPro for part of it. And both those companies are gone. And now we have Catalyst Game Labs, who actually just have the creative license control that's owned by yet a bigger company. So who's to say how many years CGL will last, how long it will go, and before it gets bought up and sold and changed to another set of people. So that's part of the nature of the game industry. It is an industry by all means. So, but there's some certain caveats. It's like in the video or in the movie franchises, the movie worlds, you really shouldn't shit all over your damn fan base. The fan base that spends the bulk of the money, those are the people you want to cheese off and screw over, because somehow you're going to get new fans to come in and take over, new subscribers to your stuff. Yeah, I got one for that. I got two for that. No, folks, this stuff's not made for kids. You don't like it, kick rocks. I don't have to cater to that kind of bullshit. So I wanna share something or two, right? Because it's some interesting stuff. As a whole, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was a project that involved varying degrees of my thought, imagination, actual working time over a period of more than a year and a half. Because of other demands, the project was pre-forced set aside for a day or a week, even longer, making it hard to get back to. Knowing that this would be the case when I began, the Monster Manual was selected as the first of the 3 volumes in the advanced game to work on. Hundreds of different creatures lend themselves to segment treatment. Only after that book was finished did I begin to put the sheave reams and notes for the players and dungeon master books in order, and then only as the bones, tables, charts, matrices, for rough typing and careful rechecking before a final manuscript was built around them. This latter part of the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons project I approached with no small amount of trepidation. After all, the game's major appeal is to those persons who are unusually active imagination and superior active intellect, a very demanding audience indeed. Furthermore, a great majority of readers master their own dungeons and are necessarily creative, most critical audience of all. Authoring these works means that, in a way, I have set myself up as the final arbiter of fantasy role-playing game in the minds of the majority of D&D adventurers. Well, so be it, I rationalize. Who better than the individual responsible for it all as the creator of the fantasy supplement in Chainmail, as the progenitor of D&D, and as the first proponent of fantasy gaming and principal TSR. The company one thinks of when the fantasy games are mentioned. The credit and blame rests ultimately here. Some last authority must be established for very good reason. There is a need for a certain amount of uniformity among campaign to campaign in D&D. This is not to say that the conformity or the sameness is desirable. Nobody wishes to have stale campaigns where dungeons and masters, traps, tricks, and goals are much the same as those encountered in any one of a score of other campaigns. Uniformity means that classes are relatively the same in abilities and approaches to solving problems in which the campaign confronts them. Uniformity means that the treasure and experience are near or a reasonable mean. Uniformity means that the campaign is neither a giveaway show nor a killer, that rewards are just, and that great risk will produce consummate rewards, that intellectual play will give characters a fighting chance of survival. No individual can actively dictate the actual operations of a campaign. However, for that to be prerogative of the dungeon master, first and foremost, and to the player in the individual campaign thereafter. In the like manner, players greatly influence the events of each particular campaign, and they must accept a large portion of the blame if it is a poor game. And if the campaign is outstanding, they deserve high praise for helping to shape the game and playing well. So at best, I give you parameters here, and the rest is up to the individuals who are the stuff that D&D is made of. Naturally, every attempt has been made to provide all of the truly essential information necessary for the game, the skeleton and the muscle, which each DM will flash out and create a unique campaign. You will find no pretentious dictums herein. No baseless limits arbitrarily placed on a female strength or male charisma, no ponderous combat systems for greater realism. There isn't a hint of a spell point system whose record keeping would warm the heart of a monomaniacal statistic lover or anything else of the sort. You will find a material which enables the dungeon master to conduct a campaign which is challenging, where the unexpected is the order of the day. Much of what takes place is meaning and the reason from within the framework of the game world. It is important to keep in mind that after all said and done, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons is a game. And because it is a game, certain things which seem unrealistic or simply unnecessary are integral to the system. Classes have restrictions in order to give a varied and unique approach to each class when they play, as well as to provide a play balance. Races are given advantages or limits mainly because the whole character of the game would be drastically altered if it were otherwise. Everything in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons system has purpose, most of which is found herein is essential to the campaign, and those sections which are not, such as the subclasses of characters, psionics, similar material, are clearly labeled as optional for inclusion. What is here is, hopefully, presented in a logical sequence as possible, clearly understandable, and with as few ambiguities as could be managed. Many readers will want more material. There is a wealth of commercial and fan material available for fulfilling such needs. Similarly, even when most important material herein can be altered and bent to suit the needs of the individual campaigns. Where possible, true guidelines have been laid down to provide the barest of frameworks for those areas of the campaign which should be advanced most unusual and unique. Read the work or both works if you are a DM, and assess for yourself what AD&D really is. I am convinced that it does for the old D&D, plus supplements what Greyhawk did for D&D when it first appeared, and then some. I have put into these works what should be the more important parts of a superior D&D campaign, cutting out material for which actually adds little or nothing to the game, revising the old and adding and expanding the essential areas. Special thanks are due to the following persons, etc., etc. So, and they given their comments and criticism contributions to the game. Runs down a list of some well-known people and some not so well-known people. All of the good players and kindly dungeon masters who have taken the time to talk with me at conventions have dropped me a line in order to pass on their experiences, suggestions, and ideas. Also, thanks to Judges Guild, whose suggestions have helped with this work and on whose products have helped D&D Gary Gygax. So, it says 1978. Gary wrote this in 1978. So we talk about a lot of things today, and they talk about woke culture and altering basic things that have been an establishment for 40 years because of modern sensibilities and et cetera, et cetera. No offense, but Gary covered 90% of that, 95% of that crap in 1978 when he wrote this. Probably in 76 or 77 when he actually wrote this before he made it print. It says it right there in his own damn words that it's not designed for things like that. Not to change things or to give things the open end. It's flat out says. The whole damn thing is just to give you material to feed your own individual creativity and expectations. To give you bones, a framework, guidelines, but they're not end all or beat all. One of those caveats that's in every Dungeon Master's Guide in the early days is that these rules are meant as guidelines, not as absolutes. Now I'm paraphrasing it so it's not in those exact words, but the concepts are the same. So it's the concepts is the basics of how we look at this and how we play this stuff out. And when we're looking at a lot of this mindset today, when they're talking about this one D&D and the open game license, Gary Gygax from day one understood the concept of encouraging players and dungeon masters to own the game, to make it their own. Matter of fact, it's like I said, I read it to you right in here in his own words. It goes on about when he says that we can't cover everything and that other people will come up with great stuff. And for all means, take advantage of it. And if you're creating that stuff, by all means, produce it and put it out there. Make it compatible. If you go and you look at the very concepts of Judges Guild, for example, Judges Guild was an entity unto itself. The creators and publishers and writers and creative staff that created the Dungeon Guild's material, it was 100% designed to be used to make use of the Dungeons & Dragons rule set. And Gary Gygax, in his earliest days, understood and welcomed it. He didn't see that as competition. He didn't see that as somebody else taking money out of his pocket. He saw that as a greater community building a bigger thing. So in a lot of aspects, that was the genesis, the beginning of the concept for the open game license from the various beginning of the Dungeons & Dragons franchise. And why is that a major thing? Why does Dungeons & Dragons seem to be the thing that comes up the most? No offense, folks, it's the grandfather of everything. Every game system out there today, whether it's tabletop role play, video game based on fantasy role plays, sword and sorcery, most of our movies in modern era, TV series in modern era, all owe influence, or all owe to the influence of these early creators and their early concepts and the open game license concept before that was a thing, right? So when they talk, so that's something that Wizards of the Coast are controlled and owned by a bigger entity, Hasbro. It's a money game. This is part what I say in some of my comments I leave on other people's YouTube channels, that look, when the people in charge never play the game, they don't immerse themselves in the material, they don't they don't sit around a table with their contemporaries and have sessions, they fully do not understand or grasp even the basic nuances of what's going on here. All they want is power, control, and money. Money, 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 money. Once again, and I say it over and over again, I have no problem with a company making money. They got to make money to generate more stuff. It's not rocket science. But at some point, greed becomes damaging and detrimental to the very concept of what they're trying to do. And from everything I've heard and what I've read so far about this one D&D, that's exactly what Wizards of the Coast, a la Hasbro, is shooting for. They want to wrap everything up in a tidy bundle that they 100% control and benefit from. In many ways, Games Workshop does the same crap. The same crap. So more and more stuff. This is another reason why I've never been a big fan of PDF. I fully understand and support the concept of PDFs and the ease and flexibility they offer. I have nothing personal against it, but digital content in its essence scares me. I bought this in 1980. I had its predecessor in 78. This is 2023. I still have this thing today. It's actually in pretty damn good shape, considering how old it is. This laptop I'm working with, this is probably my 8th, 9th computer I've owned since the 90s. Computers don't last. Electronics don't last. They get corrupted, they get lost, they get destroyed. Yeah, hard books can get destroyed too. You can have a fire, you can have a flood, you can lose them. Some moron can stick them in boxes and shove them out in a barn. People can steal them. You can forget them somewhere. But much harder for this to disappear. And sure, the next generation will come along and it replaces it. I've got the second edition player's manual sitting right up there on the stack that came out in 84, 89, something like no. Yeah, I think it was 89. And then out to, what was it, 90, sometime in the early mid 90s, 3.0 came out. Somewhere down the road, it became known as 3.5. I realized I have 3.0 and some 3.5. It's all 3.0. It's all third edition as far as I'm concerned. Then it came out with fourth edition, which was a horrible thing, in my personal opinion. It was a good system. I played it, but it reeked of a video game. And at that point in time, I understood. I saw the writing on the wall of what the corporate hacks running this damn stuff was shooting for. They wanted to see the pen and paper versions of these games go away. They want this stuff to die because this stuff costs far much more money and effort, money for them, than what digital format costs. You don't need, it's like brick and mortar stores. Once Amazon came along, a lot of brick and mortar stores started to phase out, to suffer. They had to reinvent themselves or become displaced. So once the digital format becomes the ruler of things, well, great. Then they don't have to invest in money in publishing, paper, warehouse space, people handle all this material. No, it can all be done digitally at a digital website, bang, boom, bang, and all they do is collect money. And they collect even more money, which goes in their pockets, not necessarily into their projects. And then they also wanted to transverse to a virtual setting. So the virtual setting is even worse because you're going to buy virtual material, virtual books, virtual, electronic tokens, electronic minis, things that physically don't have any value. Physically. don't have any value. Then what? They control all that. And if it's stored digitally on their websites, on their servers, and one day they decide, it's no longer valid, you've just spent all that money over the 10 years on all this other stuff, and then in an instant, it's gone because they have that control. And your choice is to buy the next best thing or not play anymore. And while portables, computers and tablets and things are portable, oh yeah, they're real portable. They're fragile too, and they're subject to problems of things like electronics interference, corrupting interference, electricity interference. I guarantee you, when I was in my teens and my friends and I would go camping on the weekends, we'd bring our books with us and play D&D around a campfire. How many of you played D&D around a campfire with your laptop? Well, there's a few people that do, but the majority of people didn't. It's the same reason where I could take a book and I could throw it in the back of my car and leave it sit there for 2 fucking years, occasionally pulling it out and looking at it when I'm waiting at some place for some reason, and it would still be a solid book and it wouldn't disappear. Somebody's not likely to break into my car and steal a book out of the back seat. Never ever happened. You leave your laptop laying around in your car, you might not have a car. You come back to broken windows because they've stolen to get your crappy laptop. Leave an old broken laptop in the back seat of your car and see how long it lasts. Because I'm pretty sure, unless you live in some really top-notch neighborhoods, it's going to walk away. Somebody's going to find themselves in the possession of your crappy old broken laptop without realizing it's broken until they get it home. So there's always those advantages and desires and reasons for having these things, right? So when we look at the basics of the game and the game concepts, first edition set the bar for the other editions to follow. And the layout is pretty slim. It's pretty easy. This precedes THAC-Co, right? There's a lot of conjecture and not so fond memories of people who talk about THAC-Co. THAC-Co itself wasn't introduced until 1989, but I did my due diligence. I checked the shit. To hit armor class 0, that's what THAC-Co means. Now, I've always known what THAC-Co means, but I didn't always remembered that I knew what it meant. So I had to look it up too. An attack roll was substituted from the character's THAC-Co if equal to or better than the target's armor class it hit. So THAC-Co was a 2.0 thing. It was introduced in the late versions of 2.0 and become a thing. By the time that third edition came out, THAC-Co had become history. They had once again altered and changed the rules because they didn't like it. So the basics of your player handbook is pretty straightforward. You look at the, if you look at the material that's in here, you're not looking at a huge thing. Basic stuff, everything you needed to know. About 120 pages of material in here, compared to third edition or 3.5, which is damn near twice the size of this. As game books go, if you've got the monster manual and you've got the dungeon and you've got this, technically you really don't even need the Dungeon Master's Guide to play the game. The basic mechanics for playing and doing shit is right here in this book. And the monster manual gave your opponents, your opposing force, your options. And if you had that book and this book, you're golden. The Dungeon Master Guide just expanded on all that stuff to give you the person running the show, guidelines, hints, tips, and suggestions on how to create the campaign, the dungeon, the settings, what to do with the non-player characters, how to run the monsters better, how to look up more specific rules that people wanted to know, why do certain things apply, etc., etc. That matters. It really does. This book, some 40-odd years old, is still relative now as it was 40-odd years ago. You can take a pack of kids and their 10-year-old that have never played the game in their life and give them a copy of this book and the monster manual and watch what they do. If they want to play, they will learn and they will play and they will have a blast doing it. You don't need all the revisions and changes and new stuff that's come along. That's something that Wizards of the Coast at the core, somebody there knows this. They know this, but they also know that by changing the damn open game license to really basically stick their hands for Hasbro and to stick their hands deeper in your pockets is detrimental to the whole concept of the damn game in the first place. And it's a slap in the face of literal generations of players, and more importantly, the dungeon masters. You want to F the damn dungeon masters over? You want to discourage them? And the reason I can feel solid about saying this and ranting about this is when I heard about the concept of their virtual tabletop, that their updated new version of D&D Beyond, which I dropped my subscription to it too. I mean, I'm not paying them $30 a month for it. I can't justify it. I simply cannot pay that money for something like that. Especially considering all this BS that's going about with it. The problem here is that they want to eliminate homebrew. Home rules is what it used to be called, but in reality it is creative introduction of variances that the dungeon master and his players and her players wish to enact. If you want to do that in D&D Beyond, after all this is set up to go the way Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast want it to go, then you're going to have to pay through the nose for it. You're going to pay extra for that privilege. Because that's what they want. At the end of the day, it's all about the freaking money. They're dipping into the money to get as much money as they can out of their players, because they see these third-party outfits out there that are doing successful. They're doing well, and they've capitalized off of that open game license for so long that they're getting jealous of it. They're jealous of the fact that they feel that it's the other way around, that these third parties have been taking money out of their pockets, that they've been putting their hands in their cookie jar. So it's just like the creative control. Gary Gygax, I read you his words. Gary Gygax knew from the very beginning, and it actively encouraged the player base to contribute and to share. And if you have a good idea and it's worthy of your effort and time to produce it, then get paid to do it. Get paid for it. He had no problem with it. Of course, he wasn't in it to make he wasn't in it to be a billionaire. He wasn't in it to pay a bunch of corporate, freaking stockholders and crap like that. It's not about. That's what most big corporations are. At the end of the day, all corporations, beyond the mom and pop operations, any corporation of significant size, at the end of the day, it's about mammon. It's about money. It's about their money. And how much more money of your money can they put in their pocket? And everything else is trinary. It's not even secondary. It's trinary. They wouldn't even produce a product if they could figure out a way for you just give them money. They would let's blow smoke up your backside and you give us money for it. They wouldn't even, they'd be ecstatic, because that's what that's all about. So when you get that kind of people that run shit, it's not surprising to see that this where stuff goes and how fast it goes south, and how greed can corrupt and destroy wonderful products, wonderful histories of things that have lasted so long. In part, it was Gary Gygax's inability to be a capitalist that helped push him out of his own company. His family, his sister, and some other members of the corporation that was TSR, the TSR became, manipulated him out of the damn position of being in charge. And then what did they do? They ran the bitch into the ground. The history is pretty clean and straightforward. His sister took control, and she kept coming up with idea after idea that turned into crap. And you know what? Some of the big chunk of those ideas parallel WotC today. WotC is running high. Hasbro is running high off of the success of things like Stranger Things, of D&D being included in Stranger Things. The popularity and attention that that's brought to their pocketbook. So that's where the movie that they've got coming out. They've tried D&D movies before and D&D animated series before, and they weren't that great. They didn't do well. They flopped, and it was TSR who was behind some of that. And Gary Gygax's sister specifically was holding the reins because it was about money. And when it flopped, what ended up happening? TSR blew up, fell apart, and ended up being sold and bought up. So anyway, we look at these basic things, and we look at the basic book of the rules, and when people talk about, oh, I don't like this and I don't like that, well, that's because you have the options. One of the most lambasted, hated sub rule that comes with any tabletop game general, but D&D was big on this, was encumbrance. Most players, most GMs choose to ignore the logistic side of encumbrance because it's not convenient. One of the first earliest ways of getting around that was they came up with magical means such as bags of holding, which allowed you to carry hundreds of times the mass weight of what you would normally, your character theoretically should be able to carry, and get around the need for ever having to worry about that. I mean, honestly, that's the whole concept. And the very basics of encumbrance is pretty straightforward. It's a paragraph and a half. It's not very complicated. The more crap you carry, the slower you go. And at some point, you got too much crap, you can't carry it. Not hard, not rocket science. You know, if you're in the field and you're packing 150 pounds of shit on your back, and you've got your hands full and your arms full, and you've got something tied to a rope that you're dragging behind you, you're barely making a fraction of your land movement. It takes you forever to get anywhere, and suddenly the bad guys jump out of the woods and attack you. How fast can you drop your shit? That should have been the rule. How fast can you drop your crap? How many times does your opponent get to take a free swing at your ass while you're trying to unload your damn backpack, get your backpack off, or untie that whatever it was you're dragging behind you? It's just like movement and distance, traps and encounters. All this stuff it's in the player handbook initially because it's about the player. It's about the player's impact, about the campaign, and about the event impacting. Another favorite thing about my personal favorite that comes up. This is one of the things that cheeses off people at a game table far more often than it ought to. The concept of initiative. At some point, people got lazy. And it actually worked it into the rule book, so it became lazy. They thought, well, we just roll initiative once at the beginning of a encounter, and everybody runs off the same initiative. That's not how the original initiative was meant to be run. That's not how Gygax envisioned it, and how it should work. Because in reality, things are fluid. Things change. Stuff happens. Your ability to do something shouldn't always be the same in the same order as it was the previous time, and vice versa. Sometimes your opponent should get the drop on you just because of the way it works. So, very basic concept here was, yes, at the beginning of every round, you rolled your initiative. Yes, this is the beginning of that concept of dice heavy or chunky, where you're constantly rolling dice. You're just rolling dice all the time. Well, you know what? There's something to be said about that. I agree. You're wanting to speed things up. But there's also something you're losing too, because there's what I call the chaos factor. The chaos factor of any scenario. Combat is a fluid and changing environment. Things change, footing changes, out of position, out of whatever. So this takes that into effect. By allowing yourself and your characters to roll encounters initiative every round, really changes things up. And it actually, if you do it right and consistently, it actually can speed the encounter up too, because but it can also be a bit more dangerous too for your players. It's a matter of how you want to look at it. It's just like when you're dealing with multiple encounters. What I mean is, if your party of 5 comes up against a party of 15, and that's what they're fighting against, as the GM, having to roll 15 times for 15 bad guys is a pain in the ass. So I always did a caveat. My quote homebrew for that was I went by squad. So I would assign 15 goblins, and there would be either 5 squads of 3 or 3 squads of 5, depending on the scenario or whatever. And I would have them work in tandem. So because by definition, most quote goblins are half a hit die in damage. A regular player should be able to handle 2 or 3 goblins by themselves and not be in too awful threat. So the idea being is that I can enroll for these 3 goblins and see if they go first or the player goes first. And if they go first, then I just roll 1 to hit die for the 3 of them. Or I'll roll 3 hit die at the same damn time and go 1, 2, 3. 1 hit, 2 miss. It's a matter of perspective. But I always set that initiative or that concept up at quote session 0. The problems with session 0 that doesn't get talked about very often. There's lots of people out there have done videos. I've done 1 or 2 myself on the concept of the prep work, the prelude to of a game session or a game campaign. Our expectations and our homebrew rules, our home rule sets for our duration is that we have that session, and then that session might have happened a couple days ago, a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago, all a year ago. Even the best people's memories are not that great. Tends to slack off. So sometimes, if you have the time, you want to make the effort, setting down some homebrew basic concepts of session 0 expectations and rule sets in writing, and have them present on the table ready to go. That way, and then I would, as the GM, I would recommend rereading that. As a player, I would recommend rereading that often. Perhaps even every session. Before the session starts, glance over to remind yourself of all the caveats, the agreements, the basics that we've all decided that this is how this campaign is going to work, what our expectations are, what's acceptable, where the red lines are, so on and so forth. Because people will forget, right? So that falls into that concept of communication, negotiation. See, there's another one in here, and I should have marked it so I could just go straight to it, but it doesn't talk about it. Where is it going? Okay, and I don't know where exactly it was, but Gary Gygax understood the concept that you should not try to fight every freaking thing that comes across the table. And you just shouldn't do that. That the idea being is that your goal is to do a certain thing, and that you should shoot for that certain thing and not try to basically murder hobo your way across the whole damn world. I was rereading this earlier today, and now the damn thing I can't remember. Right here. Avoid unnecessary encounters. This advice usually means the difference between success and failure when it is followed intelligently. Your party has an objective, and wandering monsters is something which stand between them and it. The easiest way to overcome such difficulties is avoid interposing or trailing creature at all possible. Wandering monsters typically weaken a party through the use of equipment and spells against them, and they also weaken the group by inflicting damage. Very few are going to be helpful. Fewer still will have anything of value on them to the party. Run first and ask questions later. In the same vein, shun encounters with creatures found to be dwelling permanently in the dungeon, as far as you can tell, that is. Unless such creatures are part of the set objective or the monster stands between the group and its goal, has set out to gain, do not be sidetracked. A good referee will have many ways to distract an expedition and many things to draw the attention, but ignore them if at all possible. The mappers must note all such things, and another expedition might be in order for another day to investigate and destroy something or some monster, but always stay with what was planned if at all possible, and wait for another day to handle the other matters. This is not to say that if something is hanging like a ripe fruit ready to be plucked, it must be bypassed, but be relatively certain that what appears to be the case actually is. Likewise, there are times when objectives must be abandoned. If a party becomes lost, the objective must immediately be changed to discovery of a way out. If a group becomes low on vital equipment or spells, they should turn back. The same is true if wounds and dead monsters have seriously weakened the group's strength. The old statement about running away to fight another day holds true in the game. It is a wise rule to follow. On the other hand, if a party gains its set goal and is still quite strong, some other objectives can be established and pursuit of them can be followed. It is of utmost importance, however, to always carry slain members of the expedition with the party if at all possible. So even if a lone character is lost, it's usually best to turn back and head for the surface. Right? Scary Gygax, my friends. The father of modern tabletop roleplay. So, and I say that often to players. You don't have to murder everything you come across. Some encounters, and this is something that newer generations of gamers that grew up playing video games should know. There are boss encounters that you're better off not trying to engage until you're positioned to successfully do so. Whether you have knowledge of the battlefield, knowledge of the foe, knowledge of the setting, experience, equipment, and firepower to achieve your goal, sometimes it's better to run away and come back when you do have the means to have a better chance of winning. So as a game master, as the dungeon master, part of your job is not to set out to murder your players. You're not trying to create an impossible scenario where there's really no chance of a successful win, or the successful win is so tight, so hard that it becomes too much of a challenge, or it's too unbalanced or unfair. It's like saying the opposite when it comes, or the same thing when it comes to loot. Treasure is always a terrible idea, a terrible concept when it comes to any kind of game system, but it's also part of a meme. It sits there to serve as the carrot in a lot of ways, the payout for a lot of others. So when we're looking at the possibilities of too much loot, the imbalance is crazy. If you look at the average basics for D&D when it comes to things like buying food, renting a room in an inn, they talk in coppers, copper pieces. They talk in pennies and nickels and dimes, not in dollars and $100 bills. They don't talk in gold pieces and platinum pieces. Those are rare. Those are hideously expensive. So, but yet you compare that to the cost of magic items. See, this is where we get to where everybody's packing 10 or 15 different kinds of magic. Everybody has magic armor. Everybody has magical weapons. Everybody has magical items, etc. Well, ideally, if you look at the traditional stories and novels and books and things like that, now look at Lord of the Rings, for example. The only real truly magical items present in the group would have been Gandalf's staff, Gandalf himself, and the One Ring itself. Everybody else had mundane equipment, mundane stuff. Now, were they some better than others? Yeah, sure. Those items like the weapons like Sting constitute as being magical, but did Glimmer's axe count as being magical? Did Legolas's bow, or was it their skills? When we get into later versions, 3.5 or 3rd edition, however the hell you want to call it, started to introduce things like masterwork. So masterwork item is a superior made item. So I made the argument in a lot of cases that most +1 items, like +1 armor, +1 weapons, are not magical at all. They're not magical at all. They're just masterwork. They're improved items. They are better made with better materials. And so perhaps, they're using alloys and processes that make a much superior, much sharper sword, or much more durable shield than the average normal run-of-the-mill item would be. This makes them more valuable, and yes, gives them by all means, guarantees why they should have that +1 modifier on there. It's so they have effects, a shield of turning, for example, or a sort of flame on command. Well, now we have magic imbued into the weapon or the item. and then it becomes something else. So it could still be a +1 masterwork weapon that has flame 3 times a day. Well, the +1 is not there because of the flames. The flames just add extra hit, extra damage, not extra hit, that kind of stuff. So it's a matter of how you perspective from the mechanics side of things. And a lot of players, a lot of GM, they don't want to be bothered with it. That's fine. Not everybody wants to get bogged down in the mechanics. It's just like a lot of people, they absolutely hate rules doctors. They hate people who look at this thing, at these guidebooks, these books for source material as a Bible. This is the Bible of how everything absolutely must be conducted. Everything must be done. It's like certain skill checks and knowledge checks and things like that. At some point, it's a given that we need to climb a tree. Well, you don't really, unless you're carrying a fortress full of shit on you, you really didn't need to make a climb check to see if you're successful. If you're trying to climb that tree while carrying somebody, one of your wounded comrades on your back, yeah, you might want to make a check at that point. If you're trying to climb that tree while a pack of wolves are trying to tear your legs off, yeah, you might want to make a check. If you're trying to climb a tree that's not suited to be climbed, or not very durable looking, yeah, maybe we want to make a check because we're looking to see if the tree collapses on you or breaks or something. But it's a matter of perspective. It's like common knowledge versus specialized knowledge. This becomes a caveat of experience from player perspective, from the GM perspective. So it's like there's a section in the back here somewhere too where Gary Gygax talks about staying in character, the theater of the mind. He says in his own words, given time, over time, players will become thespians or thespian in like mind. So the idea is when you sit down at the table, you are no longer Bob or Jane or Terry. You are now Oscar the Barbarian or Karamith the Wondrous Wizard or whatever. And as you play, and you should to immerse yourself in the character, become the character at the table as much as possible. And then over time, the character will grow, the character's story will grow, the character will become more bolden as a character. You will become more of that character at the table. To utilize theater of the mind far more than mechanics of the book. Takes experience in a number of forms, but it also takes confidence. There's a lot of players, a lot of people out there in the last few years that have taken up this discussion on things like theater of the mind, what makes a really good game session. Don't look at Critical Role, because Critical Role is the characters and the players are traditional. That is the common game table that you're used to seeing, where the players are bantering about and they're joking and they're making comments and things that would be out of character for their character, out of knowledge for the group, because that's the nature of people. If you really engross yourself and become thespians of the table, then you're going to produce what would be considered almost a radio quality story, a production. And in essence, you are actors or becoming actors, thespians, which is what thespian is. And so the less you don't hear, if you watch a freaking soap opera, and I don't care for them, but I have listened to them more than I care to admit because I don't control the TV very much. So you never hear the character stop in mid-character and go, "What was my line again?" They've learned to not do that. They've learned to think outside the box. As long as that camera's still rolling and they forget something and they stumble, they've learned to adapt, and to sometimes you'll get some little weird moments there, but that's the concept. There's no cuts and go backsies. We're not doing that. We're not trying to produce a video quality entertainment piece that's going to get put out for money. So we're not going to do a lot of cut and paste. We're not going to do a lot of text. We're not going to go back and rewrite the program. So it's like earlier when I did this video for Weapons and Assassins for the Palladium book, I was having some technical difficulties and personal difficulties, just stumbling all over crap. It's just like when I occasionally get off on a rant that's got nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I'm sorry, but I am not, unless it's terribly bunched at the very beginning, I'm not going to stop and redo the video. My time is too valuable. I just don't have enough time during the week to sit here and do edits after edits after edits to get perfect. Just like I don't really have the skill set or the knowledge, I don't want to know. I just don't want to learn the skills that will require for me to go in and do editorial work on these videos. So where I can cut and stop and say, okay, this 30 seconds was great. These 4 seconds suck. So let's redo this 15-second thing or something. And then meld it all together to make a perfect vision. There are a lot of great YouTube channels with awesome content on there, and they're doing spectacular things. It's like technical difficulties. You notice that I'm not wobbling all over. You know why? Because I cook a bit of freaking gray tape and I tape the damn camera to the freaking boom thing I got up here that's allowing me to, you know, do that. It's just like the light thing right now. I'm actually getting a little bit of a eye strain and stuff lately. I've been playing Dwarf Fortress too damn much, and it's taking its toll on my eyes, I think. It's a very addictive game, especially in the new Steam version of it. Anyway, so the concept is that Gary Gygax acknowledges that the idea is that you're going to become thespians of some form, but you wanted to immerse yourself in the characters as much as possible, because this is what adds to, you know, the story itself. And I was going on about goals, superior plays, yeah. Superior play makes the game more enjoyable for all participants, DM and players alike, allows for more actual playing time, makes play more interesting. The DM will have to respond to the superior play by extending himself or herself to pose bigger and better problems for the party to solve. This in turn means more enjoyment for the player. Successful play means long-lived adventures or characters who will steadily, if not rapidly, gain levels. You'll find that such characters become like old friends. They become almost real. Characters with stories related to their exploits, be they cleverly wrought gains or narrow escapes, bring a sense of pride and accomplishment to their players, and each new success adds to the luster and fame thus engendered. The DM will likewise revel in telling such exploits just as surely as he or she will not enjoy the stories which constantly relate to poor play of his or her group. Some characters will meet their doom, some eventually retire in favor of new characters of different class and or alignment. Playing well is a reward unto itself, right? Characters often remember fondness and pride as well. If you believe that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons is a game worth playing, you will certainly find that you will doubly play well, but that's not the part we talked about being a thespian. If I can find out without... See, that's I said I had it, and I should have just bookmarked it, but then I end up with so many bookmarks they start falling out, and I forget where everything is at. You know, talk about mapping, everything's set, avoid necessary counters, becoming lost, goals, cooperation, equipment, cooperation, sexual adventures. Yeah, you know, it's here for love of Pete. So much good. There's so much good stuff in here that, if nothing else, I always liked back in the day telling new players you really should read this latter part of the book to get an idea of what to expect, what to do, negotiation, communication, initiative, combat, examples of combat, traps and counters, surprise, adventure, dungeon expedition, outdoor exploration, town adventure. Yeah. But he talks about, like I said, that the theater, what's now being bandied about as theater of the mind. So ideally, as you gain an experience and knowledge of how the mechanics of your system works, you really shouldn't have to ask for something, or unless it's very, very important to add that element of chance. The GM, the game master, the dungeon master should restrain himself or herself from requesting skill check rolls and intuition rolls and things like this on a regular basis. You shouldn't have to be tossing dice every 5 minutes. And the less you have to do, the better off you are. So the same thing when it comes to combat. As he's talking about it in there, a wise party, a wise group of players will understand that their goal is to achieve this one goal. We're going to bust in and steal the gem. We don't need to kill and murder our way into the place and out. If we can avoid conflict, we should. If it comes to the point where we can't, then we need to be able to be in a position to force our way out. So, if you weaken yourself in getting to your objective, you may not have enough left over, enough fuel in your tank to get out. That's part of the risk. And sometimes encounters, and this is where, as the game systems matured and changed, some of the rule sets and mind thought process behind things started to alter too, and we get this bigger, bolder idea of everything being fair, right? So when I look at BattleTech, for example, when we talk about the point system, the IM system, I really don't like it. And the reason I don't like it is because it took away so much of the basic concept of what the initial idea for it was. You should have a unit of force, a group of people and equipment that are finite in nature and abilities and what have you, and either expand upon them as part of your campaign to build them up or replace crappy shit with better shit and gain more experience, get better at what you do, and by hopefully surviving. And part of that getting better is surviving to have another battle. And so when things like salvage it mattered, and it still should matter. So the idea that we can just go into basically an arena combat scenario, and who cares if we take all the kind of damage, our mech gets wrecked because the house is just going to give us a new one. Well, at some point, even the house should go, you're on your 5th damn assault mech, dude. We're thinking it's time for you to retire and put you behind a desk. Right? So the fact that you could pick and choose, oh, okay, I'm going to have this encounter, so I'm going to use this mech and this fighter and this helo and that tank, because I got this is the points I want to spend. What? So what unit was that? Who cares? I don't like that sort of play. That's just my personal opinion. So as for to wrap all this crap up, this ramble on, if we're talking about the open gaming license and WotC wanting to get a piece of the action, there's ways to have done that and to achieve that. The other part of that open question is the idea that anything and everything that the player base creates, whether it's commercial or private, that WotC and by default Hasbro can pick and choose to take what they want, use it for their own gain, and not credit the people who produced it in any way, is bullshit. I still get it. I understand why they may be thinking this way. I know why the bean counters, and the money bags are thinking that way. It's about money. They're looking at the success of stuff like Pathfinder and Critical Role, and who are now making buku money, and then they're saying, well, look, if you're making more than $700,000 a year, we want a piece of it. Okay, maybe you need to address that. And that's what they're trying to do. But they're trying to do a bunch of different things at once, and they're doing badly. They're doing a poor job of it, and they're being dishonest about it. They're not just flat out coming out and look and say, no offense, guys, but we understand and we applaud this and we improved it, but we never intended for this to be for corporate Adventurism. We never intended the open game license and its extension to going all the way back to Gary Gygax's original concepts of it before that was even a thing, that the player and the individuals, the fan base, should be able to do all this stuff without us stepping on your toes in the process. Is one thing. It's another thing when you turn around and start making $1 million. You've got $1 million a year business making money off of our trademark material. At that point, legally, we have a right to say no, or you need to pay us something. And maybe in this case, be a little more modest about saying we want 5% or something. If you want to pay us 15%, and then we'll work even more with you by providing you in advance stuff that we're working on that we can then all exploit and benefit together. And to give proper credit where credit's due when they do utilize stuff that's been made by a third party. Because by rights, they have a right to do that. They do own the franchise rights. They are the predecessors or the owners of the former TSR product lines and things like this. That's only fair. But then to wed that's all with this digital virtual world that they're envisioning, where they're basically trying to squeeze the crap out of everybody to get as much money as they can. They want to squeeze as much gold out of you as they can freaking get out of you in every little minor way. And the same problem is this with the head cheese that's in charge of WotC and some of those, and their number 2 people come from the gaming industry. From the video game industry. They want this shit to go away. They want this book and mortar, pen and paper, tabletop to go away. They want video games. Because it's cheaper for them. Yeah, they cost a lot of money to produce that electronic shit, don't get me wrong. But from the brick and mortar side of things, from the logistics side of things, in the long term, it's far cheaper. And there's ways to benefit from that. CGL has learned that they can benefit. So there's a lot of material that was published in hardback versions before. They still retain the PDFs, and you can go to DriveThruRPG, for example, or for their own website, their own store, and you could buy the PDF version, and I can then buy the damn thing and print it out and make my own hard copy of it. I'm thinking that some of their shit's still a bit too pricey for a PDF. If it was something that they just put out, just within the last year or two, then that's understandable. But if it's a product that was put out under FanPro or under WizKids from 10 years ago, and they're still wanting, a book at the time would have cost $30, they want $25 for the PDF. I'm just saying that's greed. That's just too greedy. They want to sell it for $15 or $10. I'm more acceptable for that, and they probably would sell more in volume that way. But that's just my personal opinion, because I'm the one trying to buy that crap. So anyway, this is my thought on that. And this here, my friends, is first edition, second cover of Gary Gygax's Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Till next time, you guys have a great weekend. Going on, my friends, this is Rick, and hey, if you like the channel, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, tell your buddies, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, tell anybody else that's in the gaming industry or gaming fandom that says, hey, this is a channel worth checking out, right? Till next time, I hope you guys have yourself